Welcome to week 7 of 2 Samuel. I'm glad you guys are here today. Thank you for coming, even though it's spring break for a lot of people. I'm glad you're here. It's always interesting to see how the room shakes out, one side or the other. But hi, sweet girl. Oh my gosh, she just smiles at me all the time. I love smiley babies. All right, let's pray. Let's ask the Lord for help and for wisdom today, and then we're going to go ahead and get started talking about David and his sons. Oh. All right, Lord, thank you so much for the morning. Thank you for your presence and your peace in the midst of things that feel chaotic. We know that you're here and that you're with us. I pray that you would be with us today as we work through chapters 13 through 15 and all of the hard stuff and the gross stuff that come with them. Lord Jesus, where you have shown us our sin on full display. Lord, give me your words to speak, clarity of mind, that we can learn what you have for us to know about you. We just thank you so much for this now. In your name I pray, amen. All righty. So, if you remember, last week, 2 weeks ago, we had this great time in Israel, right? David's being the king who he's supposed to be. He's living how he's supposed to live. He is judging as he's supposed to judge, with righteousness and with mercy. And then after he's doing that for a time, all of a sudden he just takes a nosedive, doesn't he? He just takes a nosedive. And so we learned about how David deferred his duties. Instead of going to battle, he stayed home, and he deceives his servant when he sees Bathsheba, decides that he wants her, and gets her pregnant, right? And so he deceives Uriah, and then he kills Uriah. Eventually Nathan comes and calls him out, and he discloses his sin, and then there's a judgment that is spoken over David, and so he desperately seeks the Lord. And then he divinely experiences this first cracks in the kingdom that come as a result of his sin. Because God is a just judge, and he does follow through with what he said he is going to do. And so this week we turn our gaze to David's son, both of his sons, and what they do. One who is heir apparent to the kingdom, and one who is like Saul and wants glory for himself. And so let's take a look really quickly at 2 Samuel 13, verses 14 through 17. Yeah, verses 14 through 17. And let's go through that. Who wants to read our scripture?
I can.
Okay.
But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her."
Okay. There's going to be a dinger. This is the dinger, right? Lots of things that we can immediately see in these verses. What are the first things that you see?
Hated, hatred.
Yeah. Immediately we can see an Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that his hatred and hatred of her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. What else do we see?
But he would not listen to her twice.
Wouldn't listen. Anybody know what kind of listening that is? Listening with obedience, listening to change, listening to do something. What about his sequence? He would not listen to her. He is stronger than her. It says she, but it's her, right? He violated her, and he laid with her. We immediately open with a sequence of events that tell us what these next few verses are going to be about. So he has this sequence of things he does, and then his heart changes. What other words do we see repeated?
Get up, go, sending away, out of my presence.
Yeah.
Get up, go is, at the top.
Yeah, get up, go.
Get up, go, and then right below that, sending me away. And then at
Sending
the
me
bottom,
away.
out of my presence.
Yes, out of my presence. That's good. Love. What kind of loves do you think these are?
Lust.
Lust. Love is towards an object, right? It's like love towards an object. It's a lust towards an object. We'll talk about that. What about this? Her. He. Her. Her. Her.
Hated her.
Yeah, there's another her.
Her.
There's another her.
Said to her.
Said to her.
She.
She said to him. He did to me. Listened to her. Sermon said to this woman. Oh, what's this? What's he called her all the way up to this point?
Her.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If we go back, what did he call her before? Did he call her by name? Tamar. Tamar.
Yeah.
Tamar. And now that he's had his fill, now he's had his want. What he wants. What does he call her? He calls her woman. This woman. This word actually means this thing. This object. Right? Bolt the door after her. Who do we think this passage is about? What is that? 13 hers? How many he's do we have?
Pop it up, baby.
He.
He hated her. He had loved. To which he had loved her.
He had loved her. Amnon.
Amnon's up above too, then Amnon up
Not my
above.
brother, for this is wrong, and sending me away is for another that you did to me. But he would not listen to her, and he called him who served him. So put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door.
And then it's at the top in the second verse.
Amnon, right there, sorry. So we have two opposing people that this is about, right? This is about Amnon, this is about Tamar. When we start, sorry, let me get out of the way. I don't want to be in the way. We start looking at all this stuff all together. What are some things, some conclusions that we can draw from this? What does sin do? Bring shame. What else does sin do? Does it just destroy her? We're kind of a little bit ahead because we can read on past these verses, can't we? Bring shame. Sin destroys. Even more than a sin, like what started this? What did he have in his heart for her?
Lust.
You think that started big? No. Small sin. If we're going to talk about people and how they respond to sin, I think last week David was a lesson in a quick, not irrational, but what's the impulsive? This is impulsive sin, right? But David's impulsive sin leads to both of his sons playing the long game. And how sin, it can either, if we don't take it captive, it can immediately destroy us, or in the long run, it can destroy us. Because what happens to Amnon eventually? Right? He's judged eventually, not by the person he was supposed to be judged by, but he does get judged, doesn't he? What can we glean for ourselves from this? I'm thinking about sin and what sin does to others, what does that tell me for myself? Never just affects you. What does it tell me about what I should do with my sin? What would happen if Amnon had been honest with his dad and his brother and not his buddy about what was wrong? What if he had confessed? Right? What if he had not kept hidden in darkness the things that need to be brought into the light? So what should we do? When we talk about this whole morning, confess our sins one to another. We confess our sin, even that little thing, right? You think someone cheats on their spouse, usually in a split second? You think someone steals or destroys because they did it just on an impulse? What is there? There's a kingdom, my kingdom mentality that's in the back of their mind. It's a seed of sin, and they treat it like a pet, and they feed it, and they take care of it. And it's an option B, and it's a plan B that's always back there, right? And eventually it festers, and it grows, and it takes root, and then it destroys. So for us, when we're looking at this, like, oh man, we're reminded first that our sin will always affect other people. We're reminded, number two, that we should confess our sins one to another, right? Those are the two main, and obviously there's more things that you can see. There's more things that you can take out of that. But yeah, this is a very in-your-face example. If there's ever a book I was gonna believe, it's the Bible, because man, it'll just tell it, won't it? Doesn't paint the supposed heroes of the faith always in the best picture, does it? David, look what you did. You passed on your sins from the father to the sons, and look how they destroyed. They're honest about what happens. They're honest about where we can get if we don't take care of things, right?
I think it's interesting that the victim, she's the one that, it basically ruined her life, and she had the shame.
Yeah.
But the aggressor, he developed hatred, and so it wasn't like a good thing for him.
No.
What he did,
No.
because then he was angry and hateful.
Where do you think that came from? He had immediate what? Shame and guilt.
He knew what he did was wrong.
He knew it. He knew it. And he was disgusted. He turned that towards her, didn't he?
Yeah.
That should have been towards himself.
Right.
Immediately. Sin never satisfies. It never. As much as sin tells us things will be easier, the grass will be greener, sin never satisfies. Right? Okay. Last week we saw the sins of the father, and this week we're going to work through the evil of the sons. David's judgment, Nathan tells us, is going to start at home, and it starts with Amnon and Absalom, who will mirror David's sexual sin and his murder. You see that? Both of the boys are going to take the two sins that David committed in the last chapters that we looked at, and they're going to do those themselves. The princes of the people are not shepherds, but they're wolves seeking to devour all that their sinful hearts desire. And these desires, they begin in the hidden places. The hidden places where things are groomed and cared for and fed until they're strong enough to devour. David's sin was a warning of impulse, and his sons are warnings of long concealed iniquity. It's the secrecy of sin that will destroy you. So we'll turn to our first observation of a hidden obsession. Amnon had a hidden obsession. This follows the return to Jerusalem. It's an unknown length of time between chapter 12 and chapter 13. But the story opens with our main characters. First we have Absalom. Absalom is David's third son. His mother is Maacah, and she's from a place called Geshur. Geshur? I'm not really sure. One of those two. She's from Geshur, and she is the daughter of the king. The second person we see is Maacah's daughter Tamar. This is Absalom's sister. Her name means palm tree or date tree, something tall and beautiful to look at. And then we have Amnon. Amnon was David's firstborn son, and his mother was Ahinoam. In 2 Samuel 13, 1 and 2, it says, "Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her." So Amnon becomes sin sick, and he presumes the ways that he can get to her. First of all, he is sin sick with the wrong type of love. Amnon's love was one of sexual longing. It was one of objectification. It was one of lust. The word there for love literally is the idea of to breathe after or pant after someone. Makes me kind of disgusted, to be honest, right? It's this idea of a chasing after of a person or an object. And so he becomes tormented because of his unconfessed feelings. Not only were they unconfessed, they were forbidden. Leviticus and Deuteronomy both say that you are not allowed to marry your sibling. What is that? It's incest, right? You're not allowed to have incestuous relationships. But this torment is rooted in lust. He's literally bound up. The word is bound up or tied up and pressed into the straight and narrow by the thought of Tamar. It's got his insides in an absolute pretzel, and that makes him sick with grief. He literally is so obsessed with the thought of her that he's sick over her. His looming lust and his lack of action make him ill. Why do you think he's sick with grief?
He knows it's wrong.
He knows it's wrong, and he knows he can't have her. And it's become the object of what he wants. He can't have this object of the thing that he wants. His eyes literally can't see a possible way to get to her. It's impossible beyond the power of his sight. It seemed impossible to Amnon, says, beyond the power of his sight, to do anything to her, to work anything to get at her. She was a daughter of the king. She was well guarded. She was well taken care of. And he couldn't figure out a way to satisfy his lusts. The eyes will become a theme throughout the next 3 chapters, because what David did in secret, God has told us he's now going to bring into the light in front of the eyes of all people. And so there are a lot of times where the word "I" is used, but we don't translate it as "I" into the English. David was hidden, and now his sons will be exposed as Amnon works a way to get to Tamar. So he's sin sick and he plots. What can I do? What can I do? The eyes of Jonadab, where I said we're going to have a theme, can see that there's something wrong with Amnon. He said, I can see that you are not okay. Tell me what's wrong. Amnon tells his buddy, which is his cousin. It's his buddy, it's his friend. He says, this is what's going on. So he says, this is the plan. tell your dad to come, tell King David to come, and he will perceive your state, that you are unwell, and let's use that to get you in front of your sister Tamar. Now, whether or not his cousin knew his intentions were to harm her in the way he did, the Bible doesn't tell us, but we do know he was helpful in getting him in front of her. He said, we can sell this to your father, and you can end up with her in your house. Have her come and prepare you your food. Send for Tamar that she can prepare you food in your sight. That's what it says, in your sight. So here are the eyes. Everyone is seeing what is going on. And then you can literally devour her power. You can devour her power. It says that she can come and prepare the food in your sight, that you may see it and eat of it, which is the word, you may devour it from her yad, that right hand of power that we've talked about every week. You can devour her power. 2 Samuel 13:5, prepare the food in my sight so I can eat it, and eat it from her hand. In my sight signifies the face, looking in the face of someone's power, right? And we're going to see that over and over again in the rest of these chapters, whether or not someone is allowed to be before someone's face or they're kept from someone's face. And then Sensprick, he perpetrates his plan. He calls her to come before his face. He gets his dad to have her come. He says he's sick, he's on his bed. She comes, she makes the cake with the power of her hands, and then she comes into his presence. She comes in the presence of his power and strength, and she works at her calling while he works at her humiliation. He's plotting and he's planning. And so he decides he's going to go behind the backs of all the people. She's made the cakes in one room, he's in his bedroom, and he refuses to eat. He says, no, I'm too sick, I have to eat it from her hand. So he calls her into the bedroom, and he says, everyone go out from me. And he sends away everybody, so he has her by himself. And he does something that is beyond belief, right? He was not willing to listen to his sister, and he grabs her, that when she says, she won't listen to him. So listen to my brother. That's the idea of listening to do something that we talked about with obedience. She reminds him of his place. You are a son of the king. I am a daughter of the king. She even says, go to the king. I'm sure he'll let you have me, which is also a lie. We all know that the king wouldn't do that. She's trying to buy time, right? She's trying to do anything she can to satiate him, but he has prevailing strength. And as in the case of all sexual assault, he is more powerful, and it says that he prevailed over her. He was stronger than her, and he shamefully rapes her. Uh-oh. Sorry, guys. He takes the purity of his sister by force. James 1:14-15 says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, which when it conceives, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And he leaves her as a desolate place. He leaves her as a desolate place, one that is in the garden. Sorry, I cannot find my thing to scroll my stuff. In this moment, we're talking about rape. We're talking about the gravity of our choices. Amnon took a seed of sin and he turned it into a branching tree whose root was death. And we have to pause and we have to sit with two different truths. Number one, that God is still good in our suffering, And also our participation in the desolation of sin happens all the time. We have to acknowledge that we participate in sin and that God is also good in those things. And that's hard. That's really hard. What do we mean by our participation in desolation through sin? There are roots that we let take hold in our life of sin, seeds of sin that we let grab a hold of us. There are desires for the ungodly that will destroy that we sometimes take a hold of, don't we? Where are we like Amnon? Where are we not willing to listen and not willing to obey? Who are we turning into a desolate place? I would like to say the thrust of this whole section of scripture is all about Amnon and what he did, but the reality of this entire section is that we all sin. And here are the consequences. The lust of desire and the anticipation of gratification are all sin's trick. It tricks us. It tricked Amnon, and it tricks us. There's a protest, 2 Samuel 13, 14 through 15, but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and he lay with her. And then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." He literally says, "Get out, lady. Get out, woman." Guys, sin never satisfies. Sin never satisfies. Amnon's heart turns. He immediately goes from, "I love this woman, all I want is her," to, "I hate her with everything inside of me." Lust destroys lives. Tamar's life is destroyed by what he has done. This shame and this guilt come rushing in. She's no longer an object of love, but now an object of intense hatred. He says it 4 times. There are 4 different types of roots for hate with which he hated her. He says, "Put this woman, put this thing out of my presence." His repulsion is her humiliation. She said to him, "No, my brother, for this wrong and sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. And what seems like a small mental pleasure becomes a mountain of misery when we refuse to take our thoughts captive and our sin takes hold. Amnon had this mental pleasure about his sister that turned into a mountain of sin and shame and wrong. He was miserable. This is what happens when we refuse to take hold of our thoughts and keep them captive with any kind of sin. And now Amnon has left his sister desolate and humiliated forever in the presence of her people. Right? And unfortunately, we see sin's stillness and David's partiality. Sin sits in silence. There are 2 different silences that we see that happen in this next part of 13. First of all, we see silence that is devised for evil. Absalom and Tamar become secret keepers. They become secret keepers. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. They become secret haters. He says, "Don't say anything. Keep your peace." Number 1, keep your peace, because this could feel politically motivated, right? He's your brother and the heir apparent to the throne. Number 2, keep your peace because I'm waiting for the judgment of the king. And if the king doesn't judge him, I will. Unfortunately, David didn't punish his son. He refused over and over again to discipline his children, maybe because of the sins of his past. But his lack of discipline leads to destruction. He shows partiality towards Amnon, his firstborn son. And it's the just judge that we require that doesn't show up. David should have shown up. Not in ESV, but in some of the other different translations, it says he didn't punish him because he loved him with a love of firstborn son. Because that's what he was, right? And so he wouldn't do what he was supposed to, which leads to hatred. The second observation that we could see is a hidden hatred. And that's a hidden hatred from Absalom. He doesn't speak good or evil to his brother because he hates him and he's plotting. He's waiting. My dad's not going to do anything, and I will do it. And so we can see through Absalom that sin seeks violence. Absalom waits 2 years. Talk about the long game, right? He's like the champ. And Absalom plans. He says, I'm going to be the judge. I'm going to get Amnon to the shearing floor. And he commits murder and how do I say it? Retributive justice all at the same time. Wasn't his place to kill him. Wasn't his place to judge him, but that's what he does. Amnon is going to die for his sin. So Absalom, he sends out a call to his servants. He says literally, be courageous sons to me. Be courageous sons. That's what he tells his servants. And Absalom kills his brother by another man's hand, just as his father killed Uriah by his servant's hand. You see that? Amnon is sexually sinful in the way his father was, and then Absalom kills him like his father did, by someone else's hand. Oh, I didn't really do it. Then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart, literally his inner man, is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. I want to have a quick side note. Sometimes we look up things on the Google Pants and we say, give me verses about courage, right? I know I've heard this verse used probably at least once or twice about being courageous and being called. We don't want to take verses out of context. I don't think those people knew or realized that that's literally Absalom calling for the murder of his brother. So, side note, when we Google things, let's look at the verses in context, okay? So he tells them, be courageous and be valiant sons. Strike him down. And this is personal, not political. Someone needs to judge him rightly. His brothers are not going to understand that, because all of his brothers have come to the shearing floor, haven't they? This was every year when they would shear the sheep, they would have a big festival. They would all eat together. And so this is what Absalom has called them all to. His brothers are there in the middle of the dinner. They're all drunk, and he gets him killed, right? All the brothers panic, and they all flee. But someone had to judge Amnon rightly. And so sin ends up suffering all. David mirrors the response of Tamar. David's lack of leadership leads to lost life. He should have acted. And because he didn't, just like Tamar, now his clothes are torn and he's covered in ashes and he's mourning for his child. If you had only acted when you knew and you said you were furious, when you saw your daughter had been hurt, we wouldn't be here. Jonadab comes back to David with his miscreant mouth. Oh, he's the one who conspires with Amnon. He knew on some level what would happen. And this guy is a scoundrel, right? He is a scoundrel. As true as his words are, and they do come to pass, he says, listen, only Amnon's dead. Absalom's wanted to kill him since Tamar. And so don't worry about the rest of your sons. Unfortunately for them, they are suffering sons. They returned as was foretold by Jonadab, and they all came from different directions. So when it talks about the roads that they came from, like they all must have scattered. Because when the servant sees them coming, he sees some coming from this way, he sees some coming from this way, right? And some come from this way. So they all had scattered, and now they're returning to the house of their father. And it says they were weeping. We have a double word again. Remember, whenever we say the double word, they were really wailing and crying over what had happened. And Absalom, he takes a fleeing run. Where did he go? Does anybody remember where he went? He went to Jeshurun. Who lives in Jeshurun?
His mother's family.
Yeah, he went to Grandpa's house. Absalom takes off, goes to his grandpa's, and he lives there freely with his grandpa for 3 years. What did the people think about it? Well, there was sorrow for both sons. David was really, really mad and really upset about Amnon. In fact, he'll let Absalom back into his presence, but it'll never be the same as before he killed Amnon. And eventually, he also grieves over Absalom as well, because now that Amnon is gone, Absalom is the heir apparent to the throne. David's spirit, it said, first went out in anger to Absalom and went out in sadness to Amnon. Eventually, David ceased to be angry over his son. The sad thing we see is that sin separates relationships. Sin separates relationships. David's inner man, his heart was literally on his son. And so Joab sees what has happened, and he comes up with a prophetic scheme. He gets a wise woman who he handpicks from 10 miles away, so nobody would really know who she was. And he comes and he brings her to the king. Why would Joab care? He's thinking about the future heir. Joab knows that eventually David's going to have to deal with this, because Absalom is supposed to rule when David dies. And also, Joab's probably thinking, I killed Abner and I got to return to public life. Why can't Absalom? Right? So he brings this woman, and she once again, like Nathan, brings a legal case that's reminiscent of Nathan speaking to David, and she covers and hides her true intentions, and she speaks and speaks. She speaks a wise word about the importance of lineage. She speaks about this prodigal son's plight, right? One who fell to ruin because his father wasn't there to deliver him. She's a widow. One whose family is now requiring his life. This kinsman redeemer who is an avenger of blood. And David gives her a winsome response. He gives her a promise. He gives her a right judgment. He says, I'll protect you. It's okay. I'll protect your lineage. I'll protect the name of your husband so that you continue to keep your land and your house. Because see, if the kinsman redeemer kills her son, that means that everything her husband owned now goes to all the outside family, and she's left with nothing anymore. So this is the pretense that she comes under. So he says, I will give you a name and I will give you a lineage. Sin has separated your relationship for long enough. Let the son return. Let the lineage continue. So David, after they go through all the rigmarole of her talking, he realizes Joab set me up. Joab is the one who sent you. And Joab's like, he has to come back. So David agrees, and he lets the son return and the lineage continue. Absalom gets to return to his house to re-enter Jerusalem, but he doesn't get to come before the face of the king. He says he can live here, but he can't be in my presence. He gets no voice in the court. He doesn't get any of it. So Absalom lives apart in his own house, and the king's face he did not see. That's literally what it says. There's no seat for him at the table. David had offered a seat to his enemy's son, but he won't offer a seat to his own. And that probably eventually leads to bitterness that leads to Absalom trying to take over the throne before it's his time. Absalom was going to get the throne, right? He was going to have the throne. He just had to wait and be patient. But David says, you will not stand before the presence of my power. You can be here, but you will not be with me. And then we have this random little couple verses, don't we? Where the narrator turns to talk about Absalom and his family, beautiful beings. This story just kind of takes this weird turn, and it's almost like a setup for what comes next, because it puts Absalom forth as a shining sun. It's literally what it calls him, one who should be praised for his looks because he is shining. When we see those verses, who does it remind us of? Who did the Bible talk about in that same way, about how beautiful he was to look at, without a blemish, stood a foot taller than everybody else? Saul, yes. A comparison to Saul in 1 Samuel 9:2 and 10:23, a beautiful one who cares more about unholy power. He has a physical blessing, but not a character blessing. And that's what they're going to let you know. This is why what's going to happen in the rest of 15 all the way through chapter 20 is going to happen. Because he's like Saul. People see the outside and think he should be king, but on the inside he has no character. Then it tells us, a little side note, it tells us that the children of Absalom were beautiful as he was, and he had 3 sons and a daughter. And what was her name? Tamar. Absalom remembers his sister. He remembers her grief. He remembers her desolation. He remembers that she never marries and is living in his house for the rest of his life. He remembers her and he names his daughter after her. The king did not judge rightly. The king did not remember Tamar, but her brother Absalom did. Absalom is not happy with the fact that he's in Jerusalem, but he doesn't have a seat at the king's table. So he has a violent manipulation, sets Joab's fields on fire so that Joab would show up. Because he's called him twice, he wouldn't come. And this is his story, right? I don't get what I want, so I turn violent. And so Joab comes and he's like, let me speak to the king. Why do I live here in Jeshurun? It's almost like he was under house arrest. He wasn't allowed to move freely in Jerusalem. The king was always over the top of him. It wasn't what he thought it was going to be. He's like, in Jeshurun, I at least lived like I wanted to. Take me before the presence of the king. Well, it comes out that he has a hidden agenda, doesn't it? It comes out he has a hidden agenda, and sin sears his conscience. Absalom comes up with a conspiracy for treason. He first starts to make a name for himself with chariots and men who, it says, are before his face, before his power. He sends out these people. He begins to make a name for himself and act like a king before he is. And he has a plan for his own rise. David's destruction is now in full view. David's judgment and his destruction seem to be at hand. Absalom has rejected his father's rule, and he wants men to see him and wish for his. It's almost like he wants a return to Judges if you read how he's talking. This is like the ultimate no king charade. Like, come on, put me in charge. I'll do it better. Let's go back to the time when you were in charge. And he invokes the idea of a return to a time of lawlessness where every man did what was right in his own eyes. No one is judging rightly. I should be appointed judge. And he's acting like king at the gate. Where did he go every morning? Got up bright and early. Who did he beat to the gate? His dad. And people didn't catch on because why wouldn't the king send his son to judge and rule over us? Well, Absalom lets you know, actually, I'm not appointed. Oh, that I would be appointed. He's not doing things like he's supposed to, but I would. And he starts to turn the hearts of the people. When David let Absalom back into court, he kissed his face. Absalom turns the power of that kiss into a Judas kiss, because every time someone goes to thank him for his judgment, what does he do? He stands him up off the ground. He takes them by the power of his strength, his hands, and he kisses them on the hand. 2 Samuel 15:5 says, and whenever a man came near to pay homage to him, he would put out his hand and take a hold of him and kiss him. He literally would take a hand of power to strengthen the people. And he does it so much so that he steals the inner man of the men of Israel. He steals their hearts, their inner man. Guys, sin soaks our intentions. Sin soaks his intentions. He devises a plan. He says, and we're 4 years down the road from now, right? We're really playing the long game. We're 4 years down the road, and he says, Dad, I need to go to Hebron. I vowed a vow to God that said if I ever got to return, that I would come back there and I would worship the Lord. And he manipulates David's need for a religious connection, because he uses the name of the Lord 3 times in that. I'm going to worship him at Hebron. It's a lie. Who's he going to worship?
His self.
His self. Yes, ma'am. And he's doing it in Hebron. What happened in Hebron? Who was crowned king there? David. Right? He says, when you hear the trumpet, shout in triumph. When you hear the shofar blow, everyone shout in triumph that Absalom is king. And at this point, he's turned enough hearts that he has a group of people united in treason. Not only that, he was sneaky, and he invited 200 of David's men who were part of his court with him, who had no idea what was happening. So when he makes his stand, they're not even in Jerusalem to protect the city. Right? He's devised this plan. Absalom had a long-range plan that was born from a seed of hatred, a desire to rule, and a rejection of the rightful judge and king. Sometimes our little sin seeds become long-range plans to rule our own kingdom. I'm going to do this because the Lord's told me to. That's not really what I want. So maybe I'm going to subtly manipulate it till it looks like I want it to. My desires for this thing or that. So if what God has given me doesn't work out, I'm going to have a plan B in the back of my mind. Things will be so much easier. I would be so much happier. The grass would be greener if only I ruled. When we sear our conscience and choose our own kingdom, sin ends up sending somebody packing. We see that sin will suffer in hope. David realizes after he's had this time with people, after Absalom says, I'm king, somebody runs back to Jerusalem, says he's taken the hearts of Israel. David panics. Now there's 2 different reasons, and I can't really understand why. So there's 2 different things I think can happen why David panics. Because David knows that the Spirit is still with him. God's told him his line's going to go on, right? So why does he panic? Why does he leave? Well, our things say that it's 4 years later. There are some translations that says this is 40 years later. Right? So if we're 40 years down the road, how old is David? He's old. And he's like, he's going to take me. That's it. I'm done. And so he has all these interactions with all these different people. And it's almost like there are these interactions like in Ruth where people refuse to leave him. There are others whose intentions he doesn't understand, and they go all back and forth, but eventually they all have to leave, right? David's decided they have to leave, and so they go and they pass by the Ark of the Covenant, and they leave the city, and they go into the edge of the wilderness. That verse where it says they stopped at the last town, what is it called? What is it, the last house? I think it's called the last house. That's actually a town. That's actually the name, and they halted at the last house. That's actually a remote garrison that's on the edge of the wilderness. It's on the edge of the desert, and that's where he takes his people to wait. He says, I'm going to wait here with eyes that look to the Lord. He's going to suffer with hope. He's got eyes on alliances and eyes to the Lord. He says, the faithful won't leave. There are those who refuse, like Ruth, to leave their kinsman redeemer. David had redeemed a lot of different people out of a lot of different groups of people, and they refused to go. He's got hope that maybe the eyes of the Lord will see him. He says, I know that you've told me that everyone's going to see my sin and my downfall, but will you see me in the midst of that? Who knows, he says, maybe the Lord will have mercy on me. There's hope that one day he will return into the presence of the city, and that he'll return to the presence of the ark. He didn't go with God's presence before because of his sin, and now he leaves it because of someone else's sin. His refusal the first time to go with the ark to battle, to go with the presence of God, means that now this time, because of someone else's sin, he has to leave it again. Guys, don't let your sin cause someone else to have to suffer and wait in hope. Don't put people in that position. Don't let sin see us weeping as David and his people did. David went to the Mount of Olives. It says he was barefoot, he covered his head, he's wailing, and he turns this place of worship into a place of weeping. This is not the last time that we would see the true king weeping on the mountain. 2 Samuel 15:32 says, while David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, behold, Hushai the Archite came to meet him with his coat torn and dirt on his head. He doesn't go by himself. The people come with him to the Mount of Olives, and they are united together in sadness. David's dancing has been turned to mourning. And he did it before the face of God. He didn't run away from God. He went to the place of worship. He didn't run away from his king. He led the people there too. And the story ends with two types of people turning back. We have those who are loyal to the traitor, Absalom's men and his advisor like Ahithophel. Ahithophel, that's right. Who's the grandfather of Bathsheba?
Yeah, he is.
Remember, and he's like, well, he probably wouldn't happen with what happened to his daughter and his son-in-law. And so he's taken up with Absalom. And then there are also those who are loyal to the king. David's loyal court and priests who he leaves, 3 of them, 2 priests and advisor Hushai. He says, thwart everything Ahithophel has to say. Right? And then report back to me what is happening in the city. Chapter 15, it leaves us with this pit in our stomach as the hand of God's judgment on David, his son Absalom, and the hand of God's mercy, his friend Hushai, all enter the holy city together. There's not a good feeling when we end this. We're sick about what's going to happen. David's left. Absalom's entering the city. Hushai's entering the city, and we're left with this hanging pit feeling of what is God going to do? And sometimes it's hard to see hope in the midst of those hard things. But what is our hope? Our hope is that God has given us a way to hold both the terror of judgment and the comfort of his presence at the same time through Jesus. Our hope is that on the night he was betrayed, our forever King, King Jesus, wept on that same mountain while facing the enemy of death and the judgment of God. Our hope is that Jesus takes the places that sin has turned from worship to weeping, and he redeems them through the blood of the cross. Our hope is a just King who tells the prodigal son to return, not keeping us from his presence, but giving us a seat at the table where we will sit with him for eternity if we're only faithful to follow. And we know that we will be, because he's promised that he's made us so. That's our hope, is that Jesus has promised he'll keep us to the last day, that he won't let us go, and that we can be in his presence. So what do? We destroy the secret seeds of sin that we are hiding. We bring them into the light. We starve out the longings we have for sinful kingdoms by confessing them one to another. Right? And we hold on to hope in the midst of suffering, knowing that vengeance is the Lord and he will one day right all the wrongs that make us weak. That's what we do. We hold on. Doesn't make it easy, does it? We see awful things. We experience terrible things. We're not downplaying any of that, but our hope is that one day God has promised, either in this life or the next, by his just hand, he will right all wrongs. And there'll be no more weeping, right? And no more crying. Any questions?
Do you think Absalom's actions were, it says it wasn't politically motivated, but you have to think that
Yeah.
there was a political, I mean, that had to be in the back of his mind that he was gonna
Yeah.
be the heir, the
Yeah.
parent.
I think he did know that. I don't think it probably was a seed at that point, but I don't think it was as prevalent as his desire to repay
Right.
Amnon for what he did to Tamar. I think that was his main goal. It even talks about, like, he picked a shearing floor that was far enough away from the city so that he could invite his dad. Like, there's so much I could talk about. There's literally so much. Like, there's a focus on the eyes, there's a focus on the mouth. But he literally, like it says, he presses his dad over and over again. On the one hand, it was to get Amnon to be able to come. On the other hand, it was to make him feel like there was nothing that was going to happen. So he picks the shearing floor that's 10 miles away, 15, something like that, far enough away that when he presses his dad to come with the royal courts, he knows that his dad's not going to come, right? And David did. He was like, why do you want Amnon there? But we're 2 years past, and it says that he literally said nothing good or evil to Amnon or about Amnon,
In that time.
right, in that time. So David, once again, like, he's tricked 3 different times in this passage by his sons in 13 through 15. So yeah, just blind to it. And I don't know if that's blindness because of love or blindness because of his own sin, but yeah.
Is it in this passage it says, like, Absalom was his favorite?
Not
There's
in this
somewhere it says,
No.
kind of explicitly,
No, is that in Chronicles or Kings?
maybe.
It
There's,
might
like,
be later on.
favoritism of, like, he's my,
Yeah.
my son,
Yeah.
not just, like, an heir.
Yeah. And he treated them all that way. Like, there were probably multiple times he needed to judge his children and he needed to discipline his children, and he didn't, and it destroyed his kingdom. He left 10 concubines. I don't know what happened. I think it's because I hit pause. I couldn't scroll on my notes, so there were some things that we didn't talk about because I couldn't see them on the bottom of the page. Just so you know, that's why I like kept clicking back and forth. I was like, I can't make it work, so it's not gonna. He leaves 10 concubines
Yeah.
in charge, right? He leaves the women to defend the house, and obviously Absalom's gonna take advantage of that in an awful way, way that'll eventually get him killed.
Yeah.
Joab will kill him. Joab brings him back, and then Joab takes him out. Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. No surprises, we all get to read, right? I think it's hard. This last 2 sections is really hard because we have to hold God's goodness, God's sovereignty, and man's responsibility all together, right? That if we're not going to be a robot, and if there's a good and evil in the world, that there is always going to be a chance that someone will choose sin, and how God can still use that for good. We can look back to Joseph, right, in Genesis 53, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, and how God can turn those things, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't really suck in the meantime. And it might suck all the way until we get to Jesus, right? So we don't ever want to downplay that, but it's hard to hold goodness and sovereignty and free will all together at the same time. Any other thoughts? Sorry, it was a really long one today. I was on page 14 and I was like, Miss Hannah Joy.